Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Defusing the new infrastructure time bomb. So just some housekeeping for the webinar today. During the webinar, you will be muted, but you can submit any questions at any time via the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. The Q&A will run during and after the session, so please don't be afraid to pop those in there. There will be a recording made of the session, and this will be available to you afterwards. And lastly, it would be great if you could give us some feedback at the end through our feedback survey, which we use just to make sure that our webinars are still hitting the mark for you. So the agenda for today. So we're going to go through what are the most common risks and security gaps. When can you achieve quick wins via testing and security assurance? And how digital forensics at home is possible. What a roadmap for assuring security of new technologies should look like, and any questions that you want answered. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Steve.
Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. Just introduce the panel today. So my name is Steve Marshall. I'm the Bytes UK Group CISO, and I also head up the cyber consulting division here, which is all the consultants that go out and work with our customers. And that includes things like pen testing and digital forensics and incident response. So we thought it'd be a good idea today to give you some idea of the types of things that we're seeing across the customer base and working with the customers that we do. And today I thought what I would do is bring a few people together that have a lot of experience in this industry. So the first person you'll see listed there is Stuart Bird. He's the head of digital forensics and incident response at Bytes. He's got a huge amount of experience being an ex-copper and running investigations both for the police, commercial and government organisations around the globe. And I'm also pleased to be joined by Chris Gerritz as well. Chris works for and co-founded InfoSight, which as some of you may know already can be used to threat hunt within an environment to find risks, issues, points of compromise within an environment.
But you've got
Chris again today and good information about the industry, what we're starting to see in customers and these types of things in order to help you understand risks you might have in your own infrastructure. So why did we do this? Well, for a couple of reasons, really. I mean, there has been an unfortunate anecdote on Twitter that's suggesting that the current pandemic that we're involved in has been driving digital transformation within businesses, and I think probably all of us have experienced that to some degree, whether that's a scale up of existing infrastructures or whether that's a scale out into cloud or into new services of collaboration that allow people to be able to work more successfully remotely and these types of things. However, one of the problems with adopting technology very, very quickly and also being in a pandemic situation is that you've got a whole bunch of hackers and attackers and threat actors, they're at home as well. Could be working from home, so they've got access to testing rigs and those types of things. We also know that, you can hire criminal as a service for as little as $5 an hour at the moment. So there's a huge amount of attackers and motivation within the industry. When you put that in place with the more punitive regulations like GDPR, where you've got material fines that are available to customers, you start rapidly adopting technology, and that technology is complex, then you end up in a situation with business instability. And instability causes risk. So what we thought we'd do is just go through the process with you and actually look at some of the common themes, and you've seen on the agenda the types of questions that we're going to be asking and answering. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to the panel and get their experiences and get them to provide you with the information that you need. So as Michael said, if you've got questions, pop them in. Michael's going to pop them over to me, and I'll place them to the panelists. And hopefully we can answer your questions as well as give you some kind of good background advice and those types of things as well as we go. So question 1, what was the most common risks and security gaps? And what I've done is I've put a little slide together. I asked the panelists for their opinion prior to us starting this, so that you know, I could get some rough ideas. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press them on some of these areas and get some of their stories and information around this. So first question I'm going to ask both of you. I'll start with Stu and then move on to Chris. What's the most ridiculously easy thing that has led to a compromise in your experience, Stu?
Probably a lack of multi-factor authentication. It's relatively simple to implement, and particularly in cloud environments such as Microsoft 365, it just provides you with so much protection and reduces your attack landscape by a considerable percentage. So certainly that's a high priority one for me.
Cool. Chris, same question.
I think, of course, things are changing right now. You know, we have so many people working from home. We have people taking legacy networks and putting them in the cloud so they could be accessed from home, and that really changes the threat surface. And so, you know, my list of weak authentication, Trojans, and lost data are probably the top 3 we're seeing in this new world. You know, with companies that have this new architecture. Weak authentication, we're seeing RDP gateways being put up without 2-factor authentication getting compromised. Trojans and phishing still works. We're still seeing emails going to users, taking over their systems. And of course, with people going home with laptops and other data, you know, it's all possible to lose that stuff much easier. So we're seeing lost data and stolen devices being on the uptick there.
Cool. So I had a few things on my list as well. If you have to think back in your careers into, you know, the investigations that you've done for customers previously, think of a case that you did where, you know, it was the most silly, kind of ridiculous, kind of, you know, most simple thing that tripped the customer over in terms of the exposure and caused the breach of their network. Stu, what you got for me?
I think it would have to be when WannaCry was rampaging around the globe in the very early stages. A very large telecoms company from the Middle East had put the sinkhole in place, so we're actually protected. But then, due to a lack of communication between shifts in the SOC, one of the night supervisors in the SOC saw this rule, didn't really understand why it was there, so he took it off. And about 20 minutes later, they were 7,500 endpoints down than they were previously.
Okay, so that was a simple matter of communication that effectively caused a massive outage in telecoms firm. Brilliant. Chris, same question to you.
And I'm sorry, you cut out for me. Could you restate the question?
Yeah, sorry, Chris. It was just based on your experience over the years of working in investigation. You know, what kind of is the silliest thing, you know, that's caught somebody out and led to a breach that you've seen?
Oh wow, you know, so many things. I think when you get into complex organizations, you know, larger enterprises and government institutions, a lot of times their own policies are what shoot themselves in the foot. So I've seen things, you know, from you know, a change management process that is so gruesome that it takes 60 days to approve the patching of a critical vulnerability that could annihilate your organization. You know, so folks that we have an obvious threat against an organization or an obvious exploit that could happen, and the processes are so slow that they just allow themselves to be hacked because they don't want to take the risk of making a change that might hurt something. So and I've seen those arguments being made over and over in those organizations. So
cool. And in terms of all the cases that you've investigated, what do you see, percentage wise, how much percent would you say were simple attacks that caused an issue versus complex advanced threats that are used against customer, Stu? What do you think, number wise?
I think it's a relatively high percentage of what you might call simple attacks, or straight commodity malware, if you like, that can be purchased from various sources and deployed by anybody. I think that the complexity comes in how prepared an organisation is to be able to deal with an incident and go through the identify, contain, eradicate process that is incident response. But I would say, if you're running through prevent, detect, and response strategies, if you can't detect the basic stuff, then you really needn't be worrying about the advanced persistent threats, because they're just going to get through anyway. So really start your detected monitoring at fairly low levels, and at levels that you understand, and then build them out from there.
Cool. Chris, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course, my life has changed a lot over the years. When I was part of the U.S. Air Force CERT, it was all advanced, or most of it. Then of course there's always the simple stuff. We had one incident in 2011. I was leading an investigation on a major attack across our entire global network of remotely piloted drones, and this thing got leaked to the press that our drone network got hacked. Internally, we knew this was not a big threat. It was actually a World of Warcraft virus that was trying to steal World of Warcraft credentials, and it somehow wormed its way into that network because one of the technicians was playing World of Warcraft. So it wasn't a huge threat. It didn't steal data and send it to the bad guys, but we were dealing with it for quite a while because it just got everywhere. It was very sticky, and the news, of course, said, oh no, they've stolen it. So these are basic attacks against really complex organizations. And then I've seen other things where there's complex against simple organizations. But I'd say probably right now, as of the last 4 or 5 years, every attack is staged in kind of this 2-model thing. Like stage 1 is hack everything. Stage 2 is find out what called back to us, and then unleash the really advanced stuff on the organizations we really want to hit. So some of this malware will literally hit everybody, hit 1 million systems, call back with who is the system I just compromised, and then they send in TrickBot and they send in these other things and say we're going to crypto lock this organization. So we're seeing a combination that folks are getting hit with commodity malware at first, and then that access is decided how important that organization is, and then they start deploying additional tools and then give that access to an actor who cares about that organization or sell that access. So we're seeing this 2-tier thing where everything is starting out very simple and commodity-like, and then if that organization's important, they pivot or sell that access to someone who wants to take it further.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing because our experiences are different in terms of what we see across the different sectors we work in, and those types of things. Stu used to work with me previously, and we used to investigate credit card fraud. You could pretty much say, at one point we were investigating about 70% of all credit card fraud in the UK, and you could probably bet a significant amount of money that an e-commerce breach for payment card was related to a SQL injection leading to a web shell upload on the device, which is it's a really simple compromise, right? It's been around a very, very long time. It's been in the OWASP top 10 for probably pretty much as long as anybody can remember. and people are still getting caught out on, you know, on the kind of most basic risks. Why on the panel do we think, you know, these risks exist in organizations today? Stu?
I think it depends on the size and scale of the organisation, because it's certainly it's a factor in much smaller businesses that there are generally far more important things to worry about when you're in a startup, for example, maybe than considering the security aspects of your IT systems. So the businesses up to a certain size don't generally have the luxury of even having an IT administration team, let alone a security team. You know, in general terms, cybersecurity consulting can be an expensive thing to buy in, and budgets don't always allow or stretch to being able to bring in an expert to cover all of the points that need covering. Therefore, and cost of the applications. I mean, you talk about the PCI, the payment card investigation space. The product called Magento, an e-commerce platform, was by far and away the most common e-com platform that we had to investigate. And there were two versions: a sort of free community version with no support, and a paid version. And it was predominantly, if not always, the free version that people were deploying into their organisations and trusting this free, effectively unsupported e-com platform to handle all of their credit card transactions for their business. So I think in smaller businesses, it's very much based around knowledge and to some extent cost. As you grow into the larger businesses and into enterprise, again, I think it's unfortunately it's a matter of priorities from the senior levels of the business as to how much effort and funding they want to put into securing their businesses.
Cool. Chris, what are your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I think we're still seeing the effects of a workforce that's not ready to take on the breadth of things that the security requires. You know, we have a lot of unfilled jobs. There's not enough talent to go around for every organization. And so, you know, most organizations still rely on third parties to provide a lot of their security capability, especially detection and response, which can be very complex, maybe too expensive to have on hand for most organizations. When you get into the Fortune 500 and, you know, really large government entities, they obviously have huge teams with lots of talent. And then you find even get into like medium-sized banks and transportation companies that are not that size. They are primarily focused on IT and keeping the lights on, keeping the network up, and they rely on third parties to provide a lot of the security expertise. You know, they're really looking for solutions that are install and forget. You know, the antivirus, the firewall. You know, put those controls in place and hope for the best. You know, if there's any technical monitoring, you know, put an MSSP behind it, or the new MDR companies, managed detection and response, to provide that expertise. So still a heavy reliance on third parties, and we see time and time again the demand for talent is so great that some folks are putting in place people who don't have the expertise to do this kind of stuff. You know, just from an investigative standpoint, I've seen over and over, even this year, about 3 or 4 investigations where they fired the lead investigator because they simply didn't have the talent and didn't have the experience that they claimed they did, and they had to bring in a different person to go and help them remediate a threat. We just had one last week where a large breach, they brought in a company that was reputable, but the team they sent in just didn't have the talent, didn't have the experience. They had to fire them after a week, and now you're a week late on this investigation and getting your business back up. And so just be careful. You know, the name alone isn't the only thing when you're looking at bringing people in that claim to have talent. You really, you know, we're in a time where we have to evaluate who knows what and can they really help me, and not just rely on a big name. on whether they have the expertise in cybersecurity that's needed for your particular issue.
Cool, thanks, Chris. I think you know that has to be a process that you can do quickly as well, because as you say, investigation is timely in terms of the amount of damage that could be done with with an incident carrying on, while you find a team that's capable of doing the work for you and can understand your environment and these types of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to question 2, if unless anybody's got any other things that they want to raise in relation to this from the panel. Stu, Chris, anything further to add in this one? We can always come back to it later if there are no further questions.
I think we hit it.
Yeah, nothing from me at the moment, thank you.
Cool. Right, what we'll do then is we'll move on to the next question, which is about how. So we've seen the the security issues that people can face with with adopting technology quickly, and the types of things that can go wrong, and a lot of these can be very, very basic things. So the next question was about how can you achieve these quick wins, and marketing kind of wanted me to ask about testing and security assurance. I've kind of broadened this question somewhat about what can you actually do, what's available to you in order to achieve a quick win. And again, I asked the panelists prior to coming on here for some of their thoughts around this, and you can kind of see each of us has kind of looked at a different area because of the the background of what we do and how we do it and those types of things. So what I'm going to do is just ask the panel to go through why they think their areas are valid, and also why they give you kind of good bang for your buck in relation to security quick wins. So this time I'm going to start with Chris.
Yeah, so testing and security assurance, I think the traditional model here has always been about the vulnerability scan. It's about the pen test, and that's what you typically get from a technical point of view, or a review of policies. These are the types of things you do once a year or internally more often to try to figure out where the state of your network is, and how to remediate any flaws or holes in your network that might lead to a future compromise. What InfoSight was originally designed to build was a product and a methodology that folks could use to figure out whether they were actually compromised right now or not. That is something that is not often asked, and it wasn't when we started InfoSight, that folks would come in and do a pen test and say, you can be hacked, I just hacked you, this is how I did it, but they never answered the question, did someone else use that same vulnerability or path to compromise this organization, and are those unauthorized users in that organization right now? And so it's been our thesis for a long time that figuring out what your compromise status is a critical component of any assessment that you do to figure out what the state of your network is and what your current posture is. And so we call that a compromise assessment. A more advanced compromise assessment would be a third-party threat hunt. Sometimes those are used interchangeably. Some people use them as a a standard versus an advanced action, but I tend to use both. The idea really is to be able to answer all those critical questions, and tools like InfoSight are what allow our partners to go do that. So it is something I will always recommend, is to be able to do that compromise assessment or hunt during any of your assessments that you do.
Cool. Stu?
Certainly, from my perspective, planning how you're going to manage and deal with a critical cyber incident when it occurs should be a priority for any business. It doesn't have to be complex planning from the start, but you just need to get around a table with the relevant people in the organisation to consider how you would deal with something that may well take your business down. Maersk the shipping company is a good example. Back in June 2017, they lost 49,000 endpoints within an hour to the NotPetya destructive wiper. You need to sit down and ask yourself the question, in a scaled down way, if I suddenly lost 90% of the computer systems in my business, would the business still be able to continue? And then really take your planning sessions out from that point, and consider, who needs to be involved in the management of that incident, who are the decision makers, who can authorize budgets, who can liaise with third-party suppliers, and then consider the technical aspects of it. Are you retaining the right sort of information that's going to assist the incident responders to quickly identify what the problem is and how to contain it and eradicate it? And then once you've developed that plan, you need to test that plan and test the organisation to make sure that it's going to work. And if there are, when you do that testing and there are parts of it that don't fit, don't work, need tweaking, it's better to do that within the safe environment of a capability stress test than it is to try and do it on the fly during a critical incident. And also, consider compromise assessments, building compromise assessments into your security processes. As Chris just very rightly said, a pen test, for example, will tell you where your security may fail. A compromise assessment, if it's run properly, will tell you where your security has already failed, which is quite important to know. So they're the three things for me, I think, Steve.
Cool. So what we're kind of really saying, in terms of quick wins, actually, some of these things are not necessarily quick wins. So I had a bunch of stuff on here about pre-hardened images and these types of things where actually there's a lot of proactive things you can go and do when you look to expand and rapidly adopt technology, especially given our current situation. Most marketplaces that you go to with Microsoft Azure or AWS or these types of things allow you to be able to use pre-hardened images rather than a standard image. Cost a little bit more money on a monthly basis, but actually you'll get a greater level of security assurance on that. Also, making sure that the security solutions you already have in place within your organization are rolled out to these new areas, so that you put the coverage of things like anti-malware and those types of things in place as you go, and make sure that you've got the ability to be able to log an alert. I don't think there's ever been a time, Stu or Chris, where I've ever heard a forensic investigator moaning about the fact that they've got too many logs. I think I've only ever heard of cases where, we've all kind of gone in and done an assessment and actually there's just a lack of logging available.
Absolutely.
I think the other things that come up, I mean, Stu and I had an interesting case over the last couple of days where we were looking for a volume shadow copy on a Windows workstation in order to be able to prove whether somebody had downloaded a whole bunch of data from a SharePoint site and then removed that before they left the organization. And one of the things that Stu and I tripped over, and it was purely accidental, is that we kind of have all known for a long time that the volume shadow copy and system protection features in Windows 10 are turned on by default. What we kind of tripped over the other day is somewhere around 1803, 1909 version of Windows, depending on whether it's an enterprise or pro capability. Actually, VSS and system protection is off by default, which means you don't get a volume shadow copy on a Windows 10 box, and you actively have to go and turn it on. And this causes a few troubles in this particular case. So I think the thing is that, you know, some of the quick wins for me are about, you know, understanding what you've got, what actually is in place, and kind of not making assumptions about, you know, stuff is just going to be there and just going to be on by default. You know, it's about checking those things are actually there and in place, so that you kind of don't get caught out on a technicality in that regard. The other things, you know, require you to do some upfront planning and this type of stuff in order to make sure that you have the ability to be able to, you know, understand what you've got. And Chris, specifically around, you know, knowing things around asset knowledge, knowing where your assets are and what their status is. You know, if both of you, Chris and Stu, have to think about, you know, the basic things that you would want to see in place, you know, that would prevent most of the, you know, or a majority of the incidents that you see on a daily basis, what would those types of things be? And I'll come to Stu first.
I think you know, knowledge is power, information is power, and when you're having an incident, unfortunately, it isn't like CSI Cyber where everything's sorted out in 55 minutes with adverts. It takes a bit of effort, and the more preserved data that you've got about how your systems communicate internally and externally, you know, what operating systems and what versions of operating systems are they running? As Chris rightly pointed out, you know, you need to know what all of your assets are and what they do and who's controlling them. So asset and user management. You know, silly things can trip you up. Some larger companies put their logging out to third-party companies. You know, I've had situations where I've needed 24 hours of log data either side of a point in time, and the third-party companies just haven't been able to give me them, or it's going to take 4 or 5 days for them to produce it because, for example, their systems can only produce 1 million lines of logs at a time. And you know, as Chris mentioned earlier, change control and procedural things just get in the way of being able to look at this data quickly. So it's you know, it's planning and preparation, considering all of these points, will put you in a much better position to get a faster, more effective response at the point where you're having a problem.
Cool. Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this is only getting harder these days to really understand what your network looks like, especially with such rapid changes, you know, moving to the cloud very quickly, moving to a work from home workforce. You know, most organizations didn't have a good network map to begin with. And now with these rapid changes, we're seeing, you know, folks still don't know. They have a lot less control of their network, a lot less control of who's accessing their services and their data. And so, you know, this wasn't easy before COVID, and it's certainly been a challenge since. So being able to quickly understand, especially as an investigator, when you jump into an organization to try to figure out what's going on, you have to be able to quickly get a glance of what this network looks like. And a lot of times sometimes that just takes talking to the administrators on what they know. And most of the time it's actually going out there and scanning assets and scanning IP ranges and seeing what answers. And a lot of times those answers often aren't aligned with what the organization thinks they have versus what's actually out there and responding.
Cool.
And malware has evolved over time as well. I mean, when Lockheed Martin first developed the concept of the kill chain, it was a straight line. In reality, with some of the more sophisticated malware these days, your kill chain's more like a tree with no leaves on it. The malware moves in much more complex ways than they used to be. The attackers move in much more complex ways than they used to do. So it's not an easy challenge to try and keep them out. And again, you know, the fact that it's a difficult challenge to keep them out means that you're probably not going to be able to keep them out all of the time, and therefore you need to be prepared for that eventuality.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that you raised there, Stu, is that the basics only get you so far in terms of, we as an industry have been talking about, when not if for a long time. And, I think the thing is that, your security doesn't have to be Fort Knox, right? But it does need to slow the attacker down to such a point that either it's easier to go somewhere else and attack somebody else's platform, or to put enough obstacles in the way that actually, you can spot these things as they go through. So you just provide more time for your internal guys to be able to react and to be able to spot things changing on the endpoints or the network, in order to be able to give you enough intelligence to know that something's wrong, to then be able to do something about it in that regard. So quick wins turned out to be kind of not quite quick wins. There is a bit more on this in the summary section at the end, where we've given you some ideas around some of the things that you can start to use that are already there, and will help you be able to rapidly adopt technology in a safer manner. Any final thoughts, Stu or Chris, in terms of other really quick wins that you can think of for customers? Doesn't have to be in testing or security assurance, but just things that customers can think about and do quickly and easily to increase their security posture. Stu, I'll come to you first.
Roll out multifactor authentication across the organisation. If you've got remote workers, which a lot of people have at the moment, get them behind a secure VPN. Don't expose RDP to the internet without some form of control. I think they're the three main things for me.
Cool. Chris?
Yeah, I think probably the quickest win is to not be afraid of cloud technologies. There are secure cloud technologies out there. Anything with two-factor authentication and some of the critical security controls for cloud services can be quite secure. You don't need to VPN everything. You don't need to hide it all behind your own personal firewall. When you're working with folks, that are at home and when they're connecting from all sorts of different networks, a lot of times it's actually more secure just to rely on the security technologies that are provided by things like Azure and Office, Microsoft 365, direct access. You don't need to VPN every service to feel comfortable. You can use these types of cloud services, and they are completely, I would say secure, not completely secure, but they're completely acceptable from a security posture for people connecting directly to them.
Cool. I'm going to move on to the next question now. And the next question really was around, okay, so if it does go wrong, and you need the ability to be able to do forensics, how do you do that when it's not as easy to get hold of a laptop or get hold of a device, or what are the options available? What do you need to prepare for, in order to be able to take these things forward, so that if an endpoint does get compromised, how do you contain it? How do you acquire it? How do you replace it if you need to do those types of things? So again, I asked the panel for their thoughts in relation to this, and I had to think about this as well, and it drew me back to a case that we had the other day. That these guys had a whole bunch of people working at home. They had a lot of people pivoting through their office. They saw some attack traffic, go through a rule on their firewall itself. And we got a call to say, yeah, we've been breached. We've seen this traffic. And actually, when we worked through it, what we found was that, yeah, while the attack traffic did actually get through their firewall, it didn't actually hit the endpoint, and it didn't deliver any payload. So actually, one of the things to do is don't panic. Look at these things rationally And because actually you might not have an incident at all. It might just be a case that, yeah, some malicious traffic did get through, but there was no payload. There was nothing else that happened post that. You know, I've put the 6 Ps on there. I guess everybody knows what 6 Ps are, but I'll cover it if they don't. Proper preparation prevents piss poor performance is what the 6 Ps stand for, and that's about planning as well. And as you've seen throughout these questions, a lot of this actually comes back to planning. I know it's kind of not a sexy topic to talk about. You know, it's right up there with asset management in lots of cases. But you know, you do need to plan for these things. So Stu, you know, we've done quite a lot of cases recently together where, and Chris as well, you know, has been involved in a number of our cases where we've used the InfoSight toolset in terms of this. What are the big things for you that you know you need in place to be able to make sure that you can do forensics from home?
The first thing you need is connectivity of some sort, obviously, and I use connectivity in quite a wide term. Just pointing to the sort of bottom one on the list, rapid intervention. It says rapid intervention software, it's actually rapid intervention techniques using appropriate software to be able to go network wide if you need to, however big that network might be, at a very early stage in the investigation, and targeting relevant data. So preserving and collecting relevant data from a Windows system, for example, rather than flying to site, driving to site and spending 8 hours capturing and verifying a forensic image of a whole disk, for example. You know, if you're interested in the master file table, for example, go directly and plug the master file table remotely from the system. You know, considerably speeds up the response. If you can then do that at scale, whether it's a 10 host network, a 50 host network, or a 5,000 host network, that, you know, again, we spoke about a kill chain being like a tree with no leaves on. You may need to go out to the whole network and find the start point that's going to enable you to pivot from to resolve the incident. Connectivity is important to be able to do that. You know, a lot of the issues that we've seen in recent weeks is you know, organisations who have traditional methods of pushing software from the centre to their endpoints when they're connected to the corporate network. So they might use GPO or SCCM or PS exec in some cases to push new software or updates out to the endpoints. That's very difficult to do, and VPN capacity has been a problem within a lot of the organisations who've had to move rapidly to remote workers because they simply don't have enough capacity in the VPN to join everybody at the same time. So when they have an incident and an agent needs to be deployed, they can't get the network-wide connectivity required to be able to push that agent at scale. And having first responders, I mean, you know, there's other options. You know, I spoke with a company a couple of weeks ago who had that particular problem, and in the end, we packaged the agent up in a zip file, and everybody got SharePoint connectivity, so everybody was instructed to go and download it from that SharePoint site, put it on the desktop, unpack it, and double-click it. We got about a 90% success rate by doing that. But also having a little bit of knowledge in your organisation as to what the technical processes are going to be, why the incident responder who comes on, you know, who gets involved with you to sort your incident, why that person's going to ask for certain things, why he's going to do certain things. So training of first responders to some degree within your organisation is also very important. So that you understand at a basic level when not to power off a computer. You know, pull the Ethernet cable out the back, but don't power it off because it preserves potential evidence in RAM, in running memory. How to package, you know, and that kind of training can be pushed on one more level to sort of what I call incident triage training, where you're starting to learn a few more technical techniques as to how to try and identify what the problem is. So you're doing a little bit of local triage. You might be able to pull out some of the relevant data that I was talking about, and if you're not able to use the remote tools, then secure ways of transferring that data to the incident response team, can be found. So really, it's all those things working together. Yeah.
Cool. Chris, what about you?
I think the important thing is to understand that the world, a cloud-centric world, is really focused on the endpoint, on the devices that you're connecting from, and so being able to directly access those devices is critical to be to extend your security sphere. I think we may get to it here in this webinar, but the old world of network monitoring and firewalls and IDSs is really going away, not completely, but going away because of the amount of folks connecting from various networks. You're taking a laptop to Starbucks, and a lot of organizations have kind of flipped their thinking to really the layers of the endpoint and the identity. And so organizations that have a really good hold of this are using tools like Microsoft's Azure AD. And so Azure AD extends your Active Directory environment to the cloud. Folks will take their legacy stuff and do Azure AD Connect to make sure that their remote assets are following the same policies and have a distribution method for software. Microsoft Intune, you can push software to. So organizations that have these things in place tend to be a lot easier to deploy software to. And regardless, you need to have endpoint agents that give you the ability to do more than just what an antivirus does. Antivirus is going to scan that system and send you alerts. Really, you need something that has control. Detection and response requires some complex things to be done, and you need some flexibility. And so, InfoSight, we can send any type of script, any type of third-party tool down to an endpoint to collect data on it. If it's something that InfoSight hasn't built in natively, we can, push something down. If it's a particular case with a particular piece of information we need, we can go and define that, pull it, and continue the investigation. You can't do that with a lot of the traditional antivirus and endpoint tools. You need something with that flexibility, and some of them are called forensics tools, some of them are EDRs with the ability to get to dynamically ask for different things. And so those types of technologies are very differentiated. If they have the ability to allow forensics and allow complex response options, those are the things you need on your endpoints, on your laptops, on your home workers, so that when you have an investigation that needs to be done, when you have a suspicion about a hack, you can go and check on those systems without having that user, complexly, installing software or sending you the laptop and being out of work for a while.
Cool. Couple of quick questions, because I know we're coming towards last 10 minutes or so to get in the roadmap stuff as well. So very quickly, what do you find both the technical knowledge and capability is in most organizations that you deal with, and their ability to be able to help you deploy tools in wide area or understand the kind of questions that you're asking? What do you find that's like? Is that basic? Is it some? Is it advanced knowledge on the whole that you tend to find, Stu?
Well, within the customer organisations, you mean? Yeah, I think it varies, and again, a lot of it comes down to the size of the organisation and to some extent how what the business is about. Obviously, more businesses that are operating in more technically focused areas tend to have people in the organisation with a better understanding than somebody who might be running a large construction firm, for example. So it varies. I think it's fair to say that, unfortunately, a lot of times where we engage with organisations who haven't prepared and don't have any real technical level of technical knowledge within the business, it does make the response challenging, because generally you find in that situation that preparations haven't been made in terms of capturing the right log data, for example, or dealing with a potentially infected endpoint properly at the point where the incident strikes. So it can make things challenging. But obviously, as you grow up to in size to enterprise, they tend to start to have more technical knowledge in house. Again, to varying degrees, but certainly they'll have admin teams, and some of the large ones start to develop not only security teams but also threat hunting, threat intelligence teams as well. So it really scales with the size of the business, I think.
Cool, Chris.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a key question to ask. You know, when one of our partners or we arrive on an incident is, does the organization have positive control of its devices? You know, some organizations have bring your own device, and you just rely on the system owner to administer that or provide access, which is very difficult. Organizations with positive control have the ability to say, we've got these systems, we can deploy software to them, we can make a configuration change, and we can enforce our policies. And so if you don't have the ability to do that and answer that question, you know, you really need to look at some of the new technologies that are out there to be able to provide that, especially the cloud-enabled ones, so that you have positive control of every device, regardless of where they're connecting from. And those things are available, and they are secure enough to use for even the most complex organizations.
Cool. I'm going to move on to question 4 because we're in the last few minutes. I haven't seen any questions come up so far in relation to this. So we'll crack on with a roadmap for assuring security of new technologies and what it should look like. And I hand over to Chris for this because he's got an interesting take on some of the things that, you know, the likes of Microsoft, Google, and Apple and Facebook and these kind of guys use. So I'll hand over to Chris.
Cool. Yeah, so this is something we touched on a little bit earlier, but you know, if you look at traditional network defenses, how we've done security for the last 25 years more, it's really perimeter focused. And so you look at these enterprises and they say, we've got to protect our enterprise. Anything inside the network is good, anything outside that network is bad. I call this the M&M model of defense. And an M&M, you know, it's basically a candy with a hard candy shell and a soft gooey center. As soon as you get past that shell, you could basically get anywhere inside that network. And so in these traditional networks, they're very focused on the perimeter. And this, you know, the technologies that they really rely on and have the expertise for is IDSs, is packet capture. If you want someone to connect from externally, you have them VPN in so that they can go through these same perimeter devices and be inspected as well. And so what we see is when organizations went to a work from home workforce and they said, is my risk increasing? If this is your model of defense, then yes, your risk will increase when you go to a work from home workforce. You know, we've seen organizations that have this as their primary model, and they just give every person a VPN access into the network. Now you have no perimeter. It's poked so many holes. It's coming from whatever network you think about, from home to a coffee shop. And so this model of defense really doesn't translate well to a work from home or a cloud-centric world. You want to go to the next slide? So the new model is really about zero trust. This word's thrown around a lot, and a lot of people talk about it without clearly defining what that is. But really, we're talking about a world in which there's a lot of cloud services, and we're connecting from anywhere. And so Google, back in 2014, wrote up an entire model for this called BeyondCorp. And BeyondCorp is a type of zero trust network. And it begins with a simple assumption is that connecting from a particular network shouldn't determine which services and data you access. So just because you're on the inside of a network or you're VPN'd in doesn't mean you should access that data without being checked on. And so the way that Google put this together is their internal network or their Wi-Fi at Google headquarters is no more trusted than the Starbucks or the home network. And so everyone is treated the same, zero trust, whether they're corporate network, whether they're VPN'd, or whether they're calling from home. And so their model of defense is not about the perimeter. They just basically assume it doesn't exist. Anything inside that perimeter is just as untrusted as the internet itself. And so what they really focus on is verifying who is accessing through identity layers and ensuring the devices they're connecting from is secure and clean through endpoint security. So it's not an emphasis on network layer technologies. It's really about these identity layers and these endpoint security layers that defines the security model for a cloud-centric, work from home type network. And so these types of organizations, when they moved everyone to work from home, if you think about Facebook, you think about Google, these folks are architected like this, and they can operate securely during COVID just fine, with so many people from home, which is why you're starting to see them saying, hey, we don't plan on bringing most of our workforce back. They can operate from anywhere they want because they have this model. And should be one more. And this is the other thing is, we focus on identity and endpoint for folks connecting from wherever. We also have to think about the services that we're providing. So if an organization does have services and they had an internal server and they then say, we're going to work from home, so I need to put that server in the cloud. We move it to Azure, we move it to AWS. There's a couple things that need to be addressed. And so I really boil it down to 4 things that are security controls that you have to have. And then if you don't have these, then you need to protect it with a whitelist or a VPN. I would say a VPN is actually it is a crutch for internal services that aren't architected for cloud accessibility. Everything on the internet's being hit all the time by hackers, so they need to have these 4 things. You need to have SSL certificates that are not self-signed. They need to be able to identify your service and make sure it's the real thing. You need that transport encryption with TLS. Multi-factor authentication, so that you're not the misuse of passwords isn't taking over your systems and your services, and then brute force mitigation. Traditional brute force mitigation on an internal network is you try to connect with the wrong password 3 times, it locks out your account. You can't do that on the internet, because if your internet accessible service, someone's going to try 3 wrong passwords all the time, and you're going to denial of service yourself. So you don't want that type of brute force mitigation. You want to block the IP that try to do the failed authentication. If they fail authentication 3 times or multiple times in a minute, block that IP for a certain amount of time so that the legitimate user can still access their services. So these 4 services, these 4 security controls are essential for any service you put online and make it internet accessible. And then there's, of course, the 5th one is optional. Not everyone does it, but DDoS protection in case you have a threat from that. If someone wants to denial a service, your publicly accessible service. This does not happen to every public service. It just happens to, should be based on your threat model there.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Because we're low on time now, we'll move on to the summary. And I'll put the summary screen up in terms of just some of the thoughts that we had relating to this. If I can just get your final thoughts quickly, Stu, on these areas, that'd be great.
Planning I've talked about a lot. Certainly in relation to how you respond to an incident when it happens as an organisation, it's a vital part of the process. Using secure services, when you're going into something, if you're looking at migrating to Microsoft 365, for example, don't base your decision entirely on cost. Have a look at what the various levels of subscription can offer you in terms of enhanced security. I believe at the moment, for example, that they've just changed all the names, but I think 365 Business Premium, which used to be Business 365 Business, is actually the same price as an E3 license, where you get slightly more security features in E3. So, sometimes paying an extra £3 or £4 per head per month is actually a worthwhile investment because of the additional security features that you can build into your organisation. If it does go wrong, whether you've planned or not, don't panic. Seek advice, seek expert advice early, get people on the phone, start talking. That's about it, I think.
Cool. Chris, final thoughts.
Yeah, I think my final thought is really to look at the architectures that are enabling work from home, that are enabling work from anywhere, that's being used by Google and some of these other tech companies. Look at what their best practices are. You know, you don't need to completely architect your network, you know, and reinvent everything. But as you move services to the cloud, understand the new security models, be able to access your devices wherever they're connecting from. And really, I think cloud adoption is certainly on the uptick. We've seen heavy cloud adoption in the US, and it's been a little bit slower in many other countries. I think the UK is still pretty far ahead too. But folks, you know, if you're looking at Germany or South Korea, a lot of them are still lingering on when they want to move to that model. And just understand that these tech companies are doing really well with it. You know, I can't, you know, you don't really have huge phishing problems at Google because they're using things like hardware security keys, and they're using strong identity services and strong identity layers. And so look to the best practices of some of these companies as you're re-architecting your network for remote work and for cloud services, and make sure you have positive control of all your devices regardless of where they connect from.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Stu. We're just over time, so I think we'll run to an end there. Did we have any questions, Michael, that needed addressing?
No, we didn't get any questions today.
Oh man, I can't believe it. The people on no questions. Well, all I can say is that the panel must have done a fantastic job, seeing as we didn't have any questions. If there are questions that people have got, then you know, please email them into us at Bytes, and you know, we can get Chris or Stu or myself to answer them for you. I'll hand back over to Michael to close.
Yes, so yes, thank you everybody for joining. As I said before, we will be sending the recording out. If you do have any questions, just respond to that email or send them to tellmemore@bytes.co.uk. And then thank you very much to the presenters today. I'm pretty sure everybody found it very useful. But everybody have a good day. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.